The late summer heat pressed down on Wyoming territory like a hand holding a man underwater. August 1885 had turned the grasslands the color of old bone, and the trail between Pine Brush Crossing and the scattered ranch country to the north stayed so quiet that most riders could hear their own heartbeat under the sound of wind brushing across dry earth. Cole Brennan had ridden this stretch more times than he cared to count. 58 years of living had taught him to know every bend in the road, every low dip where water pooled after storms, and every place where trouble had found men who weren't careful enough. He kept his pace slow, letting his Tennessee Walker mare breathe easy after the long cattle delivery he'd finished that morning. The horse was 12 years old, steady as stone, and Cole trusted her more than he'd ever trusted another human being. His shirt hung open at the collar from the heat, and dust clung to the creases above his boots from hours in the saddle. The Colt's single-action Army .45 at his hip had been cleaned 3 days ago, and the Winchester Model 1873 rifle rested in its scabbard within arm's reach. Cole didn't expect trouble, but 30 years as a U.S. Marshal had taught him that trouble didn't always announce itself before arriving. The sun had started its slow descent toward the western ridge when Cole saw her. At first, she was just a shimmer in the heat, a dark shape moving unsteadily along the dusty road ahead. He narrowed his eyes and straightened in the saddle, studying the figure before nudging the mare forward with his knees. As he drew closer, details sharpened into something that made his jaw tighten. A young woman, maybe 23 or 24, walking barefoot with her dress torn at the shoulder and across the chest. The fabric hung crooked at her hips, where the seam had ripped, and dirt covered her legs thick enough to have come from hours of stumbling. She carried no bag, no boots, no water. Just the stubborn strength needed to keep moving when everything in her body must have been screaming to stop. Cole had seen that look before, the look of someone running from something worse than exhaustion. The woman froze when she heard the horse's hooves. Her head snapped up, and Cole saw her face clearly for the first time. Young, yes, but with eyes that carried too much knowledge for her years. Brown hair tangled with burrs and dust, a cut on her elbow that had bled and dried, red marks across her shoulder where someone had grabbed her hard enough to bruise. She swallowed hard and forced herself to meet his eyes. Cole slowed the mare to a walk, then stopped a few yards from her. The silence stretched between them, sharp and careful. Dust drifted lazily in the space that separated them. "I need a ride," she said. Her voice came out thin but steady enough. She clenched her fingers deeper into the torn neckline of her dress, trying to hold the fabric together. "I can pay however you want." The words landed between them like stones dropping into deep water. Cole watched her face as she said it, saw the way her cheeks tightened with shame even as she forced the offer out. She pulled at the torn fabric, exposing more of her shoulder and the curve of her chest, her eyes lowering in a gesture of desperate submission. Cole didn't look down. He kept his eyes on hers, waiting until she lifted her gaze again. "What happened?" he asked quietly. The question seemed to shake her more than he expected, not because it carried threat or demand, because it carried concern. She shook her head slightly. "It doesn't matter. Just take me far from here." Cole studied her for a long moment. He took in the stiffness in her posture, the trembling in her hands she tried to hide, the dried blood on her elbow from a fall she hadn't mentioned, and those red marks across her shoulder. He didn't pressure her to explain. He didn't question her shame. He simply released a quiet breath and swung down from the saddle. His left knee protested as his boots hit the ground. The old injury from the canyon ambush 8 years ago still made itself known when he moved too fast or stood too long. He walked toward her with steady, deliberate steps, and up close he could see just how close to collapse she really was. "I'm not taking anything from you," he said. His tone stayed calm, certain, and carried no judgment. "You got the horse, that's all." She stared at him like he'd spoken a language she didn't understand. Cole shrugged out of his leather coat, the one he'd worn for 15 years, and stepped close enough to drape it over her shoulders. The coat was warm from his body heat and smelled of leather oil and tobacco smoke. She pulled it tight around herself, her fingers trembling as they gripped the worn fabric. "You don't know me," she whispered. "Don't need to," Cole said. "Saw someone scared. Figured I wasn't going to ride past it." He guided her toward the mare with a hand that barely touched her elbow. The Tennessee Walker stood patient as Cole helped the young woman up into the saddle. When she moved, her skirt pulled higher along her thigh, but Cole kept his eyes on the reins, never once lowering them to study her exposed skin. She settled into the saddle and looked down at him with something close to disbelief. Cole swung up behind her, taking the reins in both hands. She hesitated only a moment before sliding her arms around his waist, holding on because she had no other way to stay balanced. The closeness sent a brief shiver through her that he felt but chose not to acknowledge. Inside his mind, Cole was already adjusting his plans for the day. Taking her home meant changing his schedule, delaying the fence repairs he'd intended to finish, and adding responsibility he hadn't expected. But he didn't question it. Leaving her on that road wasn't something he could do, not after what he'd seen in her eyes. He clicked his tongue lightly, and the mare started forward at a gentle pace. The woman pressed her forehead lightly against his back, partly from exhaustion and partly because she needed something solid to hold on to. Each of his breaths rose and fell in a slow, steady rhythm, and the consistency of it settled her nerves more than any words could have. "They following you?" Cole asked after they'd ridden in silence for a quarter mile. "I don't know," she said quietly. "They had a wagon. I just ran. I didn't look back long enough to see if they followed." Her voice carried the strain of someone who had used every ounce of strength just to survive. Cole nodded once, more to himself than to her, and kept the mare moving at a pace that wouldn't jar her too badly. "They say who they worked for?" She was quiet for a moment. Then, "Garrett Miller." Cole's entire body went rigid. The mare felt the sudden tension in his legs and stumbled slightly before he corrected her. His jaw clenched so tight his teeth ached. "You know him?" the woman asked, her voice small now. "Once," Cole said. The word came out like gravel. "Long time ago." She didn't press him further, which told Cole she understood there were things a man didn't talk about until he was ready. They rode on in silence as the sun dropped lower and the land opened into a broad field bordered by a simple line of wooden fence posts. The woman lifted her head enough to see the silhouette of a cabin in the distance. Small, worn, sitting near a lone cottonwood tree that had somehow survived decades of drought and wind. Smoke rose faintly from the chimney, the leftover sign of a fire Cole had built that morning to heat water before leaving for the cattle run. "Is this yours?" she asked. "Yeah," Cole answered. "Been living here 8 years." She watched the way his shoulders tightened slightly as he said it, as if those 8 years held losses he didn't talk about. She didn't ask. She'd been asked enough unwanted questions in her life to know when a person carried ghosts they weren't ready to share. They reached the cabin as the last of the daylight faded. Cole stopped the mare near the porch and slid down, then turned to help her without hesitation. He placed one hand at her waist to steady her, and she felt the controlled strength in his grip. She didn't flinch, but her heart gave a sharp thud in her chest because being touched without harm felt foreign after what she'd been through. When her feet hit the ground, the cool dirt surprised her bare soles. She winced from the tenderness, and Cole caught the way her jaw tightened. "Your feet," he said, looking down at them. "They took my shoes," she explained, almost embarrassed. "Said I'd run slower." Cole released a long breath. Not anger at her, but at the thought of anyone treating a woman like prey to be hunted. "You'll get cleaned up inside," he said. "I'll see what I got for your feet." He led her towards the cabin, not touching her again, just walking ahead at a pace she could keep up with. She followed slowly, taking in the land around her. A fenced corral stood to the east with 2 horses grazing quietly. A small shed leaned slightly to one side from years of storms, and a pile of chopped firewood sat near the wall, showing this man's habit of preparing ahead for colder months. Inside the cabin, the air held the faint smell of smoke and pine. The space was orderly in a way that spoke of a man who lived alone by choice. A table with 2 chairs, a shelf with tools hung in straight lines, a bed neatly made in the corner, a stove with leftover embers glowing faintly. On the wall hung a single photograph in a simple frame. A woman and 2 children, the image faded with age. The young woman stood near the doorway, with her fingers gripping the torn edge of her dress again, unsure of where to step or what to say. "You can sit," Cole said, pointing toward the chair closest to the stove. "Warm yourself first." She lowered herself slowly into the chair, careful not to move too fast in the weakened state her body was in. The warmth from the stove eased into her arms and legs, and her breathing settled enough for her shoulders to drop a little. Cole moved around the cabin with practiced ease. He poured water from a tin pitcher into a basin, set it on the table, and checked the shelf for clean cloths. The young woman followed his movements, noticing how deliberate each action was. Nothing rushed, nothing careless. She wondered if he always lived like this, or if her presence had made him more cautious. "You ever lived on your own like this?" she asked, her voice soft with curiosity. "For a long time now," he said. "Had a son once, he's gone." The words came out steady, but the tightening around his mouth revealed more than he intended. She saw the grief there, old but not forgotten. "I'm sorry," she said. He didn't answer, but he didn't dismiss the comment either. Cole brought the basin to her and set it on the table. "Wash your hands, face too. I'll get you something to eat." She dipped her hands into the cool water, and the dirt began to loosen from her skin. The moment felt almost startling in its simplicity. Clean water, a quiet room, a man who wasn't trying to take something from her. She blinked slowly, trying to steady the sudden wave of relief that made her throat tighten. She didn't cry. She refused to, not in front of him, but she exhaled with a sound she couldn't stop, and Cole heard it. "They won't get near this place," he said, firm but calm. "Not while you're here." "Why help me?" she asked after a moment, her voice more honest this time. "You don't know me." He paused while cutting bread, holding the knife still for a few seconds. "Saw someone scared," he said simply. "Figured I wasn't going to ride past it." She didn't know what to say. Not many men she'd met lived by rules like that. She looked down at her hands in the water and felt something shift inside her. Something like the first step towards safety, even if she didn't fully trust it yet. Cole placed bread and a small piece of salted pork on a plate and set it before her. She ate slowly, not wanting to appear desperate, even though hunger clawed at her stomach. Cole sat across from her, watching the window, checking the fading light outside. "You'll stay tonight," he said. "Tomorrow we'll talk about what comes next." "What if those men come looking for me?" she asked, unable to hide the fear in her voice. "Let them try," Cole said without raising his voice. "They ain't taking you off this land." The way he said it, calm and grounded and certain, pulled a faint, unfamiliar warmth through her chest. For the first time since she'd escaped, she felt her breath deepen enough to stop shaking. Night settled over the ranch, the sky turning dark blue above the quiet fields. She finished the last bite of bread, wiped her hands, and lifted her eyes toward the man who had changed the course of her day with one simple decision. "I'm Emma," she said. "Emma Hayes." Cole nodded once. "Cole Brennan." They sat in silence for a while, the stove crackling softly between them. Emma watched him in the dim light, this man who was neither young nor soft, whose hands carried scars and whose eyes carried memories. She wanted to ask him more, about the photograph on the wall, about the way he'd stiffen when she mentioned Garrett Miller's name, about why he lived alone in a place this isolated. But exhaustion was pulling her down like a hand on her shoulder, and Cole seemed to sense it. "You take the bed tonight," he said, standing slowly. "I'll stay near the door." "You don't have to do that," she said. "I know," he replied. He moved toward the shelf and took down a folded blanket, setting it on the chair near the door. Then he lit the lantern and dimmed it so the room filled with a soft glow. The light fell across Emma's face, showing the growing calm in her features, the exhaustion she'd fought 4 hours, and a hint of trust she didn't want to admit yet. She stood and walked to the bed, still wearing his coat over her torn dress. When she settled under the blanket, she looked smaller but not fragile, more like someone who had survived enough to recognize when safety was real. Cole sat in the chair near the door, the Winchester propped against his leg, his posture upright enough to stay alert. Emma watched him for a moment, memorizing the quiet strength she saw there. "Good night," she said softly. "Rest," Cole replied. Emma closed her eyes, and for the first time in months, she felt the possibility of sleep without nightmares. The cabin fell silent again, but this time the silence didn't feel empty. It felt guarded. It felt alive. Outside, the night held steady over the lonely ranch, unaware that 2 wounded lives had just shifted onto the same path. 3 hours past midnight, the mare in the corral let out a sharp whinny that cut through the darkness like a blade. Cole's eyes opened immediately, his hand already reaching for the rifle before his mind fully registered the sound. 30 years of law enforcement had trained him to wake like this, alert and ready, with no fog of sleep to slow his reactions. He stood slowly, his knee protesting the sudden movement, and moved to the window. Emma stirred in the bed but didn't wake. Cole eased the curtain aside and looked out into the moonlit yard. The light was strong enough to see clearly. Fresh boot prints near the fence line, size 10 at least, with a stride length that suggested a man around 5'10". A cigarette butt lay near the fence post, still fresh enough that Cole could smell the faint trace of Bull Durham tobacco even through the window glass. Horse tracks led away toward the northeast ridge, deliberate and unhurried. On the ridge itself, maybe 200 yards distant, a figure sat motionless on horseback. Tall, broad-shouldered, wearing a hat that caught the moonlight at an angle Cole recognized even after 8 years. The rider stayed there for 30 seconds, long enough to make his presence known, then turned and disappeared into the darkness. Cole let the curtain fall back into place. His jaw was set so tight it ached. He moved back to the chair and sat down, the rifle across his lap, his eyes fixed on the door. Behind him, Emma's voice came quiet and frightened. "What is it?" "Someone knows you're here," Cole said without turning around. He heard her sit up in the bed, heard the blanket rustle as she pulled it close. "Will they come back?" "Most likely." "When?" "Don't know," Cole said, "but we'll be ready." Emma was quiet for a long moment, then, "Why would they be afraid of you?" Cole didn't answer right away. He just checked the rifle again, making sure the magazine was full, making sure the action worked smooth. Emma watched his movements in the dim lantern light and saw something she hadn't noticed before. A tin box on the shelf near his bed, the lid slightly open. Inside, the edge of a metal badge caught the light. She shouldn't have looked. She knew that. But her eyes were drawn to it anyway, and before she could stop herself, she was seeing the words engraved on the badge's surface. U.S. Marshal, Cole Brennan, Wyoming Territory, 1855 to 1877. Emma's breath caught. Cole heard it and turned, following her gaze to the badge. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Then Cole stood, walked to the shelf, and closed the box with a quiet click. "You were a marshal," Emma said. It wasn't a question. "Was," Cole said. "Not anymore." "What happened?" Cole walked back to the chair and sat down heavily. The question hung in the air between them, and for a long time Emma thought he wasn't going to answer. Then he started talking, his voice low and steady, like a man confessing something he'd carried too long alone. "I was 28 when I took the badge. Year 1855. Wyoming Territory was still wild then. Law was whatever a man with a gun said it was, and the men with the most guns usually made the rules. I figured somebody had to try to change that." He paused, looking at his hands. They were scarred and weathered, the hands of a man who'd worked hard for every year he'd lived. "I married Sarah in 1855. She was a school teacher in Pine Brush. Smartest woman I ever met. We had a son in 1858, Thomas." Emma heard the way his voice softened when he said the name, and she knew before he continued that the story wasn't going to end well. "Sarah died in 1861, childbirth. The baby didn't make it either." Cole's throat worked as he swallowed. "I raised Thomas by myself for 16 years. Taught him to ride when he was 6. Taught him to shoot when he was 8. Read to him every night before bed. Shakespeare mostly. Hamlet was his favorite." Emma pulled the blanket tighter around herself, listening. "When Thomas turned 19, he wanted to be a deputy marshal, just like his old man. I tried to talk him out of it, told him it was dangerous work, that I'd seen good men die for doing the right thing. But he was stubborn. Said if I could do it, he could do it." Cole's hands tightened on the rifle. "In 1877, we found out the local sheriff, a man named Garrett Miller, was taking bribes, protecting whiskey runners who were selling to the Indians, violating the Indian Intercourse Act, taking $5,000 in payoffs, which was a fortune back then. Thomas found the proof, ledgers, receipts, everything we needed to put Miller away for good." Emma felt her stomach drop. "Miller, she whispered. "The same Miller who sent those men after me." Cole nodded slowly. "Same man. He was 40 years old then, sheriff of Pine Brush County, respected, trusted, and corrupt as hell." "What happened?" "Miller found out we had the evidence. He set a trap on the canyon road about 10 miles from here. 3 men with rifles hidden in the rocks. They opened fire when we rode through. Cole's voice went flat, emotionless. Thomas took a bullet to the chest. I got him off his horse, tried to stop the bleeding, but the wound was too deep. He died in my arms. Emma put her hand over her mouth. She could see it in her mind, clear as day. The young man bleeding out on the dusty road. The father holding him, desperate and helpless. The last thing Thomas said to me was, "Don't go after them, Pa. Just live." Cole's voice cracked for the first time. And I ran. I left him there and I ran because Miller's men were still shooting and I couldn't save him, and all I could do was survive. "That's not cowardice," Emma said firmly. "That's what your son wanted." "Maybe," Cole said, but Miller didn't see it that way. He told everyone I'd killed Thomas. Said I shot my own boy to cover up my own corruption. Put out a wanted poster with a $500 bounty, dead or alive. Emma's eyes went wide. "You've been running for 8 years. "Living quiet," Cole corrected. "There's a difference. I came here, bought this land under a different name, and I've been staying out of sight ever since. Most folks in Pine Brush don't even know I'm still alive." Emma looked at the closed tin box on the shelf. "And you kept the badge." "Couldn't bring myself to throw it away," Cole said. "It's all I got left of who I used to be." They sat in silence for a long while. The lantern flickered, casting shadows that danced across the cabin walls. Emma thought about what Cole had told her, about the son he'd lost, about the 8 years he'd spent alone, carrying the weight of a murder accusation he didn't deserve, about the man who had destroyed his life, and who now wanted to destroy hers. "Miller's the one hunting me," Emma said quietly, "and he's the one who killed your son." "Yes. So when those men come back, it won't just be about me, will it?" Cole looked at her directly for the first time since he'd started talking. His eyes were hard, but there was something else there too, something that looked almost like hope. "No," he said, "it won't." Emma stood up from the bed, the blanket still wrapped around her shoulders, and walked over to where Cole sat. She reached out slowly and placed her hand on his shoulder. "If I turn you in," she said, "I could collect that bounty. $500 would change my life." Cole didn't move. "Door's not locked. You're free to go." "I know," Emma said. She squeezed his shoulder gently. "But I'm not going anywhere. You saved my life. I won't betray you." Cole looked up at her, and for the first time in 8 years, he felt something loosen in his chest. Not forgiveness, not peace, but the beginning of something that might one day turn into those things. "Thank you," he said quietly. Emma smiled, a small tired smile, and went back to the bed. She lay down and pulled the blanket over herself, and within minutes her breathing had evened out into sleep. Cole stayed in the chair, the rifle on his lap, his eyes on the door. But his mind was elsewhere, turning over the pieces of a puzzle he'd been trying to solve for 8 years. Garrett Miller was back. And this time Cole wasn't going to run. The morning came slow and gray, with clouds building in the west that promised rain by evening. Cole had sat in the chair all night, drifting in and out of shallow sleep, his body trained to wake at the slightest sound. When the first light crept through the window, he stood and stretched, feeling every one of his 58 years in the stiffness of his back and the ache in his knee. Emma woke soon after, blinking against the dim light. She sat up and looked at Cole, taking in the tired lines around his eyes. "You didn't sleep," she said. "Slept enough," Cole replied. He moved to the stove and built up the fire, adding kindling until the flames caught and spread. Then he set a pan on the heat and cracked 2 eggs into it, the sizzle filling the quiet cabin with a familiar comfort. Emma stood and folded the blanket carefully, setting it at the foot of the bed. She still wore Cole's coat over her torn dress, and she pulled it tight around herself as she walked to the table. "You got any other clothes I could wear?" she asked. "I can't keep walking around like this." Cole nodded. "There's a chest in the corner. Used to belong to my sister. She left some things when she moved east. Might fit you." Emma opened the chest and found a simple cotton dress, worn but clean, and a pair of boots that were only slightly too large. She held them up, grateful. "Your sister won't mind?" "She's been gone 20 years, Cole said. "I don't think she'll notice." Emma changed quickly, turning her back to Cole out of modesty, even though he kept his eyes fixed on the stove. When she turned back around, she looked more like herself, The dress was plain but sturdy, and the boots gave her a steadiness she hadn't had in days. Cole served the eggs onto two tin plates and set them on the table. They ate in silence, but it was a comfortable silence, the kind that comes when two people have shared something difficult and come out the other side still standing. After breakfast, Cole led Emma outside. The clouds overhead had thickened, turning the sky a dull pewter color. The air smelled of rain and earth, and the wind carried a coolness that hadn't been there the day before. "I need to check the fence line," Cole said. "Make sure nobody's been tampering with it. You can come with me if you want, or you can stay here. Either way, don't go far." "I'll come," Emma said. She didn't want to be alone in the cabin, not with the memory of that rider on the ridge still fresh in her mind. They walked together across the property, Cole moving with a slight limp but steady, Emma keeping pace beside him. He showed her how to check the fence posts for damage, how to look for tracks in the soft dirt near the water trough, how to read the signs that would tell them if someone had been snooping around during the night. "You know a lot about this," Emma said. "Had to learn," Cole replied. "When you live alone, you got to be your own eyes and ears." They reached the north fence line and Cole stopped. He crouched down, studying something in the dirt. Emma leaned closer and saw what he was looking at. Fresh boot prints, the same size and stride as the ones near the cabin. "They were here," Cole said quietly. "Walked the whole perimeter, checking for weak spots." "How do you know it was them?" Emma asked, though she already knew the answer. "Because nobody else comes out this way," Cole said. He stood up, brushing the dirt from his hands. "We need to fortify. Tonight." They spent the rest of the morning working. Cole taught Emma how to reinforce the fence posts with extra boards, how to set simple tripwires that would alert them if someone approached in the dark, how to position lanterns so they could see anyone coming from a distance. Emma worked hard, her hands blistering from the unfamiliar labor. But she didn't complain. She understood what was at stake. By midday, the rain had started. A light drizzle at first, then heavier, until the ground turned soft and muddy beneath their boots. Cole and Emma retreated to the cabin, soaked through but satisfied with the work they'd done. Inside, Cole built the fire back up and hung their wet coats near the stove to dry. Emma sat at the table, rubbing her sore hands, and watched him move around the small space with the ease of long practice. "Can I ask you something?" she said. "Go ahead." "Why did you really help me yesterday? And don't say it's because you saw someone scared. There's more to it than that." Cole was quiet for a moment. Then he sat down across from her, his hands folded on the table. "When I saw you on that road," he said slowly, "you reminded me of someone. My wife, Sarah. The day she went into labor, she was scared. More scared than I'd ever seen her. And I couldn't help her. Couldn't save her or the baby. I've lived with that for 24 years. Emma's throat tightened. "You think if you save me, it makes up for not saving her?" "No," Cole said. "Nothing makes up for that. But maybe, just maybe, it means I didn't fail completely. That I can still do something right." Emma reached across the table and took his hand. Her fingers were small and rough from work, but her grip was firm. "You didn't fail," she said. "You couldn't have known what would happen. And you raised your son alone for 16 years. That's not failure. That's strength." Cole looked at their joined hands, and something in his expression softened. "Thank you," he said again, and this time the words carried more weight. They sat together as the rain drummed against the roof, two people bound by circumstance and survival, beginning to understand that maybe they weren't as alone as they'd thought. The afternoon passed slowly. The rain didn't let up, turning the yard into a muddy expanse and filling the air with the smell of wet earth. Cole and Emma stayed inside, and he used the time to teach her things she'd need to know if trouble came calling. He showed her how to load the Winchester, how to work the lever action, how to aim without closing one eye because it narrowed her field of vision. Emma listened carefully, her hands steadying as she practiced the motions over and over until they became muscle memory. "You're a quick learner," Cole observed. "Had to be," Emma said. "When you don't have anyone to rely on, you learn fast or you don't survive." Cole nodded, understanding that truth better than most. They moved on to other things, how to bar the door from the inside, which windows offered the best vantage points, where to hide if the cabin was breached. Emma absorbed it all, her fear transforming into something sharper and more useful. As evening approached, Cole made a simple meal of beans and cornbread, They ate by lamplight, the rain still falling steadily outside. Emma felt exhaustion creeping back into her bones, but she fought it off. She needed to stay alert, needed to be ready. "Tell me about Miller," she said as they finished eating. "If he's coming for us, I need to know what we're up against." Cole leaned back in his chair, his face shadowed in the lamplight. Garrett Miller's 61 years old now. He was a hard man even when he was sheriff. Smart, ruthless, patient. He built his reputation on being tough on outlaws, but that was just a cover for what he was really doing. Extortion, bribery, protection rackets. He ran Pine Brush like his own personal kingdom. And after he framed you, he got promoted, became a territorial marshal for about 5 years, then retired with honors. Last I heard, he'd gone into private business, running labor camps for the mining operations up north. Cole's jaw tightened. Sounds like the business expanded to include human trafficking. Emma felt sick. "How many women do you think he's taken?" "Don't know," Cole said. "But if you escaped 3 times, you're not the only one who tried." The weight of that settled over them both. Emma thought of the other women she'd seen in the mining camp, the hollow eyes and broken spirits. She thought of the ones who hadn't tried to run, or who'd tried and failed. "We have to stop him," she said. "We will, Coburn," Cole promised. "But first we survive him." Night fell heavy and dark, the clouds blocking out the moon and stars. Cole lit a second lantern and positioned it near the window where it would cast light on anyone approaching the cabin. Then he checked the rifles again, making sure they were loaded and ready. Emma sat on the edge of the bed, watching him work. She felt strangely calm now, the fear that had driven her for days replaced by something steadier. Resolve, maybe, or just the understanding that running was no longer an option. "Cole," she said quietly. He turned to look at her. "Thank you," she said, "for everything. For not being like other men. For treating me like a person instead of something to be used." Cole's expression softened. He walked over and sat down beside her on the bed, keeping a respectful distance between them. "You deserve better than what happened to you, he said. "And as long as you're under this roof, you'll be treated with the dignity every person deserves." Emma felt tears prick at her eyes, but she blinked them away. "I wish more men were like you." "The world would be a different place if they were," Cole agreed. He stood up and moved back to the chair by the door. "Get some rest. I'll keep watch." Emma lay down, still fully dressed, and pulled the blanket over herself. She closed her eyes and listened to the rain, to the creak of Cole's chair as he settled in for another long night, to the quiet sounds of the cabin around them. She didn't expect to sleep, but exhaustion pulled her under anyway. And for the second night in a row, she slept without nightmares, protected by a man who asked for nothing in return. Cole sat in the darkness, the rifle across his lap, his eyes on the door, and the rain-streaked window beyond. He thought about Thomas, about the choices that had led him to this moment, about the young woman sleeping in his bed who had somehow become worth protecting with his life. Outside, the storm gathered strength, and somewhere in the darkness, Cole knew Garrett Miller was planning his next move. The question wasn't if he would come, it was when, and what Cole would do when he did. The rain stopped sometime before dawn, leaving the world clean and quiet. Cole woke to the sound of water dripping from the eaves and the first tentative calls of birds greeting the gray morning light. He hadn't meant to fall asleep, but exhaustion had claimed him in the hours before sunrise. Now he straightened in the chair, his back protesting the uncomfortable position, and checked the window. The yard was empty. No tracks visible in the mud yet, though the light was still too dim to see clearly. Cole stood slowly, working the stiffness from his joints, and moved to the stove to build up the fire. Emma stirred in the bed behind him. "Morning," she said, her voice rough with sleep. "Morning," Cole replied. He added kindling to the coals until flames caught and spread. "Sleep all right?" "Better than I have in months," Emma admitted. She sat up, pushing the blanket aside. "Any sign of trouble?" "Not yet." Cole filled the coffee pot with water and set it on the stove. "But that doesn't mean it's not coming." They shared a simple breakfast of leftover cornbread and coffee, eating in the comfortable silence they'd established. When they finished, Cole led Emma outside to inspect the property in the daylight. The storm had washed away most of the tracks from the day before, but Cole found new ones near the eastern fence line. 2 horses this time, both shod, walking the perimeter slowly and deliberately. They're learning the land, Cole said, crouching beside the tracks, figuring out the best way to approach. Emma felt her stomach tighten. How long do we have? Hard to say. Could be today, could be tomorrow. Cole stood, his eyes scanning the ridgeline, but not much longer than that. They spent the morning reinforcing their defenses. Cole showed Emma how to create simple obstacles, branches laid in patterns that would slow horses, rocks positioned to trip unwary feet in the dark. They filled buckets with water and positioned them around the cabin in case of fire. Cole checked and rechecked the ammunition, counting rounds, organizing them for quick access. Emma worked alongside him, learning as she went. She was stronger than she looked, Cole noticed, the kind of strength that came from surviving things that should have broken a person. She reminded him of Sarah in that way, though Sarah had been older when they married, more settled. Emma still had the raw edge of youth on her, all sharp angles and fierce determination. By midday, they'd done everything they could. Cole stood in the yard, hands on his hips, surveying their preparations with a critical eye. It wasn't much, but it would have to be enough. Come on, he said to Emma. I want to teach you something else. He led her to the area behind the barn where he'd set up a makeshift shooting range years ago. 6 tin cans sat on fence posts at varying distances. Cole drew his Colt and handed it to Emma. The gun was heavier than she expected. She gripped it with both hands, feeling the weight of it, the potential violence contained in cold metal and mechanical precision. It's loaded, Cole said. 6 rounds, safety's off. You pull that trigger, it's going to fire. Emma swallowed hard. I've never shot a gun before. I know, that's why we're here. Cole moved behind her, adjusting her stance. His hands were gentle but firm, positioning her feet shoulder-width apart, showing her how to hold the weapon steady. 2 hands, arms straight but not locked. Breathe out when you pull the trigger. Emma aimed at the nearest can, about 10 yards away. Her hands trembled, slightly. Don't think about it too much, Cole said quietly near her ear. Just feel it. The gun's an extension of you. Point where you want the bullet to go and trust your instinct. Emma took a breath, let it out slowly, and squeezed the trigger. The gun kicked hard in her hands, the report sharp and loud in the quiet afternoon. The bullet went wide, kicking up dirt 5 feet to the left of the target. Again, Cole said. She fired a second time, closer but still a miss. Third time, fourth, fifth. Each shot got a little better, her hands steadying, her breathing evening out. On the 6th shot, the can jumped and clattered to the ground. Emma lowered the gun, a smile breaking across her face. I did it! Cole smiled too, a genuine expression that transformed his weathered features. You did. Now do it again. They spent the next hour practicing. Cole showed her how to reload quickly, how to clear a jam, how to shoot from different positions. Emma's hands began to blister from gripping the gun, but she didn't complain. This was survival. This was the difference between living and dying. When the ammunition ran low, they stopped. Emma's ears rang from the gunshots, but she felt stronger somehow, more capable, less like prey. You're a natural, Cole said, taking the gun from her and holstering it. Give it a few more days and you'll be out shooting me. I doubt that, Emma said, but she was pleased by the compliment. They walked back to the cabin together, the afternoon sun breaking through the clouds for the first time in 2 days. Cole found himself relaxing slightly in Emma's presence. She was good company, he realized. Quick-minded, resilient, with a dry sense of humor that surfaced in unexpected moments. It had been a long time since he'd had anyone to talk to besides horses and the occasional supply merchant. That evening, as they sat on the porch, watching the sun set over the western ridge, Emma asked the question Cole had been expecting. Tell me about Thomas, really tell me. What was he like? Cole was quiet for a long moment, gathering his thoughts. Then he started talking, and once he started, he found he couldn't stop. Thomas was born in 1858, right here in Wyoming. Sarah wanted to move back east after he was born, somewhere safer, but I convinced her to stay. Said I could protect them both. His voice caught slightly. Guess I was wrong about that. Emma didn't interrupt, just listened. Sarah died when Thomas was 3 years old. I raised him by myself from that point on. Taught him everything I knew. How to ride, how to track, how to read the land. But I also made sure he got educated. Sarah would have wanted that. We read together every night. Shakespeare, Dickens, whatever books I could get my hands on. Cole leaned back against the porch post, his eyes distant with memory. Thomas was smart, smarter than me by a long shot. He could have been anything he wanted. Lawyer, teacher, businessman, but he wanted to be a lawman, wanted to follow in his old man's footsteps. Cole's jaw tightened. I should have talked him out of it harder. He made his own choice, Emma said gently. He was 19 years old, barely more than a boy. Old enough to know his own mind, Emma countered. Old enough to decide what kind of man he wanted to be. Cole looked at her, really looked at her, and saw the wisdom in her young eyes. She'd lived through things that aged a person beyond their years. She understood the weight of choices in a way most people her age never would. When we found out about Miller's corruption, Cole continued, Thomas was the one who insisted we act on it. Said we had a duty to uphold the law, no matter who we were going up against. He believed in justice so strongly. Cole's voice dropped to almost a whisper. That belief got him killed. Emma reached over and took Cole's hand. Her fingers were small and rough from work, the blisters from shooting still fresh. He died doing what he thought was right, she said. That's not nothing. That's everything. Cole squeezed her hand, grateful for the comfort, even if he couldn't quite bring himself to believe her words. They sat together as darkness fell, two people bound by loss and circumstance, beginning to understand that they were becoming something more than strangers thrown together by chance. Inside his mind, Cole was making calculations. Miller would come soon. The scouts had been too thorough, too deliberate. They were planning an assault, not just a reconnaissance. And when it came, Cole needed to be ready. More than that, he needed Emma to be ready. The thought of her fighting, of her potentially dying, made something twist painfully in his chest. In just 2 days, this young woman had become important to him in a way he hadn't expected. Not as a daughter exactly, though there was an element of that protective instinct, but as someone who mattered, someone worth fighting for, someone who made the lonely cabin feel less empty. We should get inside, Cole said finally. Going to be a long night. They rose and went into the cabin. Cole barred the door with a heavy wooden plank and checked the windows one last time. Emma sat at the table, watching him work. Cole, she said quietly. He turned to look at her. Whatever happens, I want you to know something. She took a breath. I ran away from that mining camp 3 times. Each time they caught me, brought me back, punished me. I was starting to think I'd never really escape, that I'd die there or worse. Her eyes met his. But then you found me, Ma, and for the first time in months, I felt hope. Real hope. Because of you. Cole felt his throat tighten. He crossed to the table and sat down across from her. Emma, he said, his voice rough with emotion, I failed to protect my son 8 years ago. I've carried that failure every day since. But I won't fail you. I give you my word on that. You didn't fail Thomas, Emma insisted. Miller killed him, not you. I should have seen it coming, should have been faster, smarter, better. You were a father trying to do the right thing alongside his son. That's not failure, that's courage. They looked at each other across the table, and something unspoken passed between them. An understanding, a commitment. Whatever was coming, they would face it together. Emma stood and moved around the table. She bent down and kissed Cole's forehead, a gesture of affection and gratitude that took him completely by surprise. Thank you for being the kind of man you are, she whispered. Cole reached up and grasped her hand, holding it for a moment. Get some rest. Tomorrow's going to test us both. Emma nodded and went to the bed. She lay down fully clothed the way she had the night before, ready to move quickly if needed. Cole took his position in the chair by the door, rifle across his lap, and settled in for another night of vigil. But this time, as he sat in the darkness listening to Emma's breathing even out into sleep, Cole didn't feel quite so alone. For the first time in 8 years, he had someone to protect, someone who needed him. And that made all the difference. The attack came on the 4th day, just as the sun was starting its descent toward the western horizon. Cole had been checking the water trough when he heard the horses. He straightened immediately, his hand dropping to the colt at his hip, his eyes scanning the ridgeline. Emma was in the cabin making bread, and he moved toward the door with quick strides despite the pain in his knee. 2 riders appeared from the east, coming at a slow walk. Cole recognized them immediately from Emma's description. Jake, the tall one with the scarred face, and Russell, shorter and stockier with a cruel twist to his mouth. They stopped about 50 yards from the cabin, making no move to dismount. "Emma," Cole called without turning his head. "Stay inside." He heard the cabin door crack open behind him. "What is it?" "Company, stay back," Jake called out, his voice carrying easily across the distance. "We're here for the girl, old man. Send her out and there won't be no trouble." Cole stood his ground in the middle of the yard. "She's not yours to take." Russell laughed, a harsh sound. "Miller paid good money for her. She's his property now." "She's a human being," Cole said, his voice hard. "Not property, and she's under my protection." Jake spat into the dirt. "You protecting a lot of things these days, Brennan?" The use of his name made Cole's blood run cold. They knew who he was, which meant Miller knew, which meant this was about more than just Emma. "Turn around and ride away," Cole said. "Last chance." Jake reached for the rifle on his saddle. Cole drew and fired in one smooth motion, the decades of practice making the movement instinctive. The bullet struck the ground inches from Jake's horse, making the animal rear and sidestep. Jake barely kept his seat. "Next one won't miss," Cole said, the Colt steady in his hand. From behind him, Emma's voice came clear and strong, "And neither will mine." Cole risked a glance back. Emma stood in the doorway, the Winchester held with surprising confidence, aimed at Russell. Jake's face twisted with anger. "You're both dead. You know that, right? Miller's coming himself, with a dozen men. You can't fight all of us." "Maybe not," Cole said, "but we'll take a few with us." The standoff stretched for several long seconds. Then Jake jerked his reins, turning his horse. "Your funeral," he snarled. "We'll be back before dark." The two riders galloped away toward the north, dust rising behind them. Cole waited until they were out of sight before lowering his gun. He turned to Emma, who was trembling now that the immediate danger had passed. "You did good," he said. "I was terrified," Emma admitted. "Fear is natural. It's what you do with it that matters. And you stood your ground." Cole holstered the Colt. "But they weren't bluffing. Miller's coming. Tonight, most likely. We need to prepare." They spent the remaining daylight hours getting ready. Cole showed Emma how to position herself in the cabin for the best fields of fire. They moved furniture to create barricades, stacked sacks of grain near the windows to stop bullets, and filled every container they had with water in case fire became a threat. As the sun touched the horizon, Cole did something he'd been putting off. He went to the shelf and took down the tin box that held his old marshal's badge. He opened it, looked at the tarnished metal for a long moment, then pinned it to his shirt. Emma watched from across the room. "Why now?" "Because if I'm going to make a stand," Cole said quietly, "I'm going to do it as the man I used to be, the man who believed in something, not the man who ran away." Emma crossed to him and adjusted the badge, straightening it on his chest. "Thomas would be proud." Cole's eyes glistened, but he blinked the moisture away. "We'll see." Darkness fell like a curtain. Cole lit two lanterns, positioning them to illuminate the yard without casting shadows that could hide attackers. He and Emma took positions on opposite sides of the cabin, each with a clear view through the windows, each with a loaded rifle and extra ammunition within reach. The waiting was the hardest part. Minutes stretched into hours. Every sound outside made them tense, ready, but nothing materialized. Midnight came and went, 1 in the morning, 2. At 3:15, the horses in the corral began to whinny and stamp nervously. "Here they come," Cole said quietly. Emma's hands tightened on the Winchester. Her heart hammered against her ribs, but her breathing stayed steady. All that practice, all that preparation, came down to this moment. The first shots came from the north, bullets punching through the cabin walls above their heads. Cole returned fire immediately, aiming at the muzzle flashes in the darkness. Emma fired from her position, working the lever action the way Cole had taught her, laying down covering fire toward the eastern approach. More shots erupted from multiple directions. Miller had brought at least 6 men, maybe more, surrounding the cabin in a loose perimeter. They were firing blind in the darkness, hoping to pin Cole and Emma down while they moved in closer. "Conserve ammunition," Cole called across the cabin. "Only shoot when you have a target." A figure darted across the yard, illuminated briefly by the lantern light. Emma tracked him and fired. The man went down with a cry, clutching his leg. She'd hit him. The reality of it made her stomach lurch, but she forced the feeling down and worked the rifle's lever, chambering another round. From the west, someone threw a torch toward the cabin. It landed on the roof, flames beginning to catch on the dry wood. Cole swore and grabbed one of the water buckets, climbing up to douse the fire before it could spread. While he was exposed, a bullet caught him high on the left arm, spinning him around. He fell hard from the roof, landing in the mud. "Oh!" Emma screamed. She ran to the door, threw the bar aside, and rushed out. Two men were advancing on Cole's position. Emma brought the rifle up and fired twice, fast, not really aiming, just trying to drive them back. One of the shots connected, taking the lead man in the shoulder. He stumbled and his companion grabbed him, dragging him back into the darkness. Emma reached Cole and helped him to his feet. Blood soaked his sleeve, but he was conscious and moving. "Get inside," he growled. They stumbled back into the cabin together. Emma barred the door while Cole slumped against the wall, pressing his hand to the wound. The bleeding wasn't arterial, but it was steady and concerning. "Let me see," Emma said. "No time." They're regrouping. Cole forced himself upright, grabbed the rifle with his good arm. "Watch the back window. They'll try to flank us now." Emma moved to her position, her hands shaking but her resolve firm. She could hear men shouting outside, coordinating. Then footsteps on the porch. Someone was trying the door. The wood splintered under a heavy impact. Once. Twice. On the third blow, the bar cracked. Cole aimed at the door. "When it opens, get down." The door burst inward. Jake stood framed in the opening, shotgun raised. Cole fired, the rifle shot catching Jake square in the chest. The big man staggered backward and fell. But Russell was right behind him, diving through the doorway low. He came up fast, reaching for Emma. She swung the rifle like a club, catching him across the face. He went down but grabbed her ankle, yanking her off balance. Cole couldn't get a clean shot without risking Emma. He dropped the rifle and drew his knife instead, crossing the cabin in 3 quick strides. He grabbed Russell by the hair and put the blade to his throat. "Call them off," Cole said through gritted teeth, "or you die right here." Russell froze, feeling the cold steel against his skin. "Miller won't stop," he gasped. "He wants the girl, and he wants you dead." "Then Miller can come get us himself," Cole said. He shoved Russell toward the door. "Get out. Tell him if he wants a fight, face me direct. No more sending men to do his dirty work." Russell scrambled through the door and into the night. The shooting had stopped. Cole could hear the attackers withdrawing, dragging their wounded with them. He stood in the doorway, rifle in one hand despite the blood running down his arm, and watched them go. When the last hoofbeats had faded, Emma came to stand beside him. Her face was pale, her hands trembling now that the adrenaline was wearing off. "Is it over?" she whispered. "For tonight," Cole said. He looked down at her, this young woman who had stood and fought beside him without hesitation. "You saved my life out there." "You saved mine first," Emma said. "I was just returning the favor." Cole managed a tired smile. "Come on, let's get this arm patched up before I bleed out." Inside the cabin, Emma worked by lamplight to clean and bandage Cole's wound. The bullet had passed through the muscle without hitting bone or major vessels. Painful but not life-threatening. She wrapped it tight with strips torn from a clean sheet, her hands steady despite everything they had just been through. "Where did you learn to do this?" Cole asked. "My mother was sick for a long time before she died. I learned to care for her." Emma tied off the bandage and sat back. "I learned a lot of things I never wanted to know." Cole reached out with his good hand and touched her cheek gently. "You're stronger than you know, Emma Hayes." She leaned into his touch, tears finally spilling over. "I was so scared. When I saw you fall, I thought you were dead. And I realized that I can't lose you. You're all I have." "Hey," Cole said softly, "I'm not going anywhere. Takes more than a bullet to put down an old warhorse like me." Emma laughed through her tears. "You're not that old." "Tell that to my knee," Cole said wryly. They sat together in the damaged cabin, surrounded by bullet holes and broken furniture, exhausted but alive. Outside, the false dawn was beginning to lighten the eastern sky. "What happens now?" Emma asked. "Now Miller knows we're serious, that we won't go down easy." Cole looked at his bandaged arm. "He'll come himself next time, probably with the law on his side using that old warrant against me." Then we need evidence, Emma said. Something to prove you're innocent. To prove Miller's the criminal, not you. Cole was quiet for a moment. Then he said, there is evidence. Thomas hid it before he died. He told me where, but I was too afraid to go get it. Afraid if I went back to that canyon, I'd never leave. Where is it? Under my wife's grave marker, on the canyon road. Cole met Emma's eyes. We'll have to go there, both of us, because if Miller catches us on the open road, we'll need 2 guns to have any chance. Emma nodded slowly. When? Tomorrow. We rest today, heal up, then we go at first light tomorrow. Cole stood carefully, favoring his wounded arm. But for now, we sleep, both of us. We're going to need our strength. He helped Emma to the bed, then settled into the chair one more time. But this time, Emma shook her head. No, you need real rest, not another night in that chair. We'll take turns keeping watch. Cole was too tired to argue. He lay down on the bed, and within minutes, exhaustion pulled him under. Emma sat in the chair with the rifle across her lap, watching the broken door and the lightning sky beyond, and thought about everything that had happened. 4 days ago, she'd been running for her life with nothing but desperation and fear to drive her. Now she had a purpose, a protector who'd become something more, something like family, and a fight ahead that would determine whether they lived or died. She looked at Cole sleeping. His weathered face relaxed for once, the marshal's badge still pinned to his bloody shirt. This man had given her hope when she had none, had treated her with dignity when others saw her as property, had stood between her and death without hesitation. Whatever came next, Emma knew one thing with absolute certainty. She would fight for him the same way he'd fought for her. Not out of obligation, but out of something deeper. Something that felt like the beginnings of love, though not the romantic kind she'd once imagined. This was something purer, the love between people who'd saved each other's lives and souls in the process. Outside, the sun rose over Wyoming territory, painting the sky in shades of gold and crimson. And somewhere out in that vast landscape, Garrett Miller was planning his next move, unaware that the 2 people he hunted had become something far more dangerous than he anticipated. They'd become a family, and families fought for each other to the bitter end. They left at dawn when the world was still painted in shades of gray and purple. Cole's arm throbbed beneath the bandage, but he could still use it well enough to handle the reins. Emma rode behind him on the Tennessee Walker, her arms wrapped around his waist, the Winchester strapped across her back. The canyon road lay 10 miles northwest, a journey that would take them most of the morning at the careful pace Cole set. He didn't want to tire the mare, and he needed to stay alert for any sign of Miller's men. The land around them was open enough to see riders from a distance, but there were gullies and rock formations that could hide an ambush. They rode in silence for the first hour, both lost in their own thoughts. Emma watched the sun climb higher, burning off the morning mist, and tried not to think about what they might find at the canyon, or who might be waiting for them there. Tell me about your wife, she said finally, needing to hear something other than the steady rhythm of hoofbeats. Cole was quiet for so long that Emma thought he wasn't going to answer. Then he spoke, his voice carrying a softness she hadn't heard before. Sarah was from Boston originally, came west to teach school in Pine Brush back in 1854. I met her at a church social, believe it or not. A faint smile crossed his weathered face. I was 27 years old, already a marshal, and I'd never seen anyone like her. She had this way of looking at you that made you want to be a better man. What did she look like? Emma asked. Dark hair, almost black, green eyes, small, maybe 5'2", but she had a presence that made her seem taller. Cole's hands tightened slightly on the reins. She was carrying a stack of books when I first saw her, more than she could really manage. I offered to help, and she looked at me like she was trying to decide if I was trustworthy. And was you? Eventually, Cole said. Took me 3 months to convince her to let me court her properly. She had standards, Sarah did. Wasn't going to settle for just any man. Emma smiled against his back. She chose well. She chose wrong, Cole said, and the softness was gone from his voice. I got her killed. If she hadn't married me, hadn't come to this godforsaken territory, she'd have lived a long life back east teaching children and drinking tea. You don't know that, Emma said firmly. Women died in childbirth everywhere, Cole, in cities, in towns, on farms. It wasn't your fault. Tell that to the part of me that still hears her screaming, Cole said quietly. They rode on in heavy silence after that. Emma hurt for him, for the weight of guilt he'd carried for 24 years. She wanted to tell him that life was full of choices and chances, that you couldn't control everything, that sometimes people died and it wasn't anyone's fault. But she knew he wouldn't believe America. Some wounds went too deep for words to heal. The terrain grew rougher as they approached the canyon. The road narrowed, winding between rock walls that rose 30 feet on either side. This was where Thomas had died, Emma realized. This was where Cole's world had shattered 8 years ago. Cole slowed the mare to a walk, his eyes scanning the high ground. Stay alert, he said softly. This is the perfect place for an ambush. But no shots came. No riders appeared. They passed through the canyon without incident and emerged onto a stretch of flat land dotted with scrub brush and a few twisted trees. In the distance, Emma could see a wooden cross marking a grave. Cole dismounted stiffly, favoring his wounded arm. He helped Emma down, then stood looking at the grave marker with an expression of such profound sadness that Emma had to look away. I haven't been back here since the day I buried her, Cole said. 24 years. The grave was surprisingly well maintained. Someone had been caring for it, keeping the weeds clear, replacing the cross when the old one rotted. Cole noticed it too, frowning. Who's been tending this? Does it matter? Emma asked gently. Someone remembered her. That's a gift. Cole nodded slowly. He knelt beside the grave, his movements careful because of his injury. The inscription on the cross was simple. Sarah Brennan, beloved mother and wife, 1828 to 1861. I'm sorry, Sarah, Cole whispered. Sorry I couldn't save you. Sorry I let our boy die. Sorry for everything. Emma knelt beside him and placed a hand on his shoulder. They stayed like that for a long moment, honoring the dead, before Cole finally stirred and began to dig. The earth was hard-packed, and digging one-handed was difficult. Emma took over using a flat rock as a makeshift shovel, scraping away dirt until her fingers hit something solid. A metal box, rusted but intact, buried about 2 feet down. Cole pulled it free with his good hand and brushed off the dirt. His hands trembled as he worked the latch. Inside, wrapped in oilcloth to protect it from moisture, was a leather-bound ledger in several folded papers. Cole opened the ledger carefully. Page after page of entries in Thomas's neat handwriting. Dates, amounts, names. A complete record of Garrett Miller's corruption, meticulously documented over the course of 6 months. He did it, Cole breathed. He got everything. Beneath the ledger was a letter. Cole unfolded it and read, his eyes moving across the page. Emma watched his face crumble, watched tears track through the dust on his weathered cheeks. What does it say? She asked gently. Cole's voice was rough when he spoke. Dear Pa, if you're reading this, I'm probably dead. Miller knows we found the evidence. He'll kill us both to keep it quiet. I'm not afraid. You taught me to stand up for what's right, no matter the weight. I just wish I had more time. More time to make you proud. More time to see what kind of man I could become. I love you, Pa. Please don't blame yourself. And please finish what we started. Make sure Miller pays for what he's done. Your son, Thomas. Cole folded the letter carefully and held it against his chest, his shoulders shaking with silent sobs. Emma wrapped her arms around him and held tight, letting him grieve for the son he'd lost, for the years of pain and guilt and loneliness. When Cole finally pulled himself together, his eyes were red but clear. He looked at the evidence in the box, then at Emma. We take this to the U.S. Marshal in Cheyenne, he said. It's a 4-day ride, but Marshal David Carter's an honest man. He'll listen. And Miller? Emma asked. Miller won't let us get that far, Cole said grimly. He'll try to stop us on the road. They were reburying the empty box, covering their tracks, when Emma heard the horses. She spun around and her heart sank. 6 riders emerged from the canyon, spread out in a line, and at the center on a big black gelding sat Garrett Miller himself. He was 61 years old but still powerfully built, with iron gray hair and cold blue eyes that missed nothing. He wore a marshal's badge on his vest, though Cole knew it was probably fake or stolen. Miller had a way of bending the law to suit his purposes. "Cole Brennan," Miller called out, his voice carrying easily across the distance. "Been a long time." Cole stood slowly, his hand moving toward the Colt at his hip. Emma grabbed the Winchester, her mouth dry with fear. "Miller," Cole said flatly. "I see you found Thomas's evidence," Miller said, nodding toward the open grave. "Smart boy, your son. Too smart for his own good." He smiled, showing teeth, but not smart enough to stay alive. "You murdered him," Cole said, his voice shaking with barely controlled rage. "I eliminated a threat," Miller corrected. "Same thing I'm going to do with you." "You can try," Cole said. Miller's smile widened. "Oh, I'm not going to kill you, Brennan. That would be too easy. No, I brought someone who wants to see you very much." He gestured, and one of the riders moved forward, dragging someone on foot. Emma's breath caught in her throat. It was a man, maybe 55 years old, gaunt and filthy, with the red nose and trembling hands of a chronic drunk. He looked up, and Emma saw his face clearly for the first time in 6 months. "Uncle Thomas?" she whispered. Thomas Hayes looked at her with bloodshot eyes full of shame. "Emma, I'm sorry. I'm so sorry." Miller laughed. "Touching reunion, isn't it? Your dear uncle here has been working for me since before you were born, Emma. He's the one who told me where to find you every time you ran. He's the one who sold you to me in the first place." Emma felt like she'd been punched in the stomach. She'd suspected, feared, but having it confirmed was something else entirely. "Why?" she choked out. "Debts," Thomas Hayes mumbled. "I had gambling debts. Miller said he'd kill me if I didn't cooperate." "So you sold your own blood instead," Emma said, her voice cold. "You sold me like livestock. I didn't have a choice." "There's always a choice," Cole said harshly. He turned to Miller. "What do you want?" "Simple," Miller said. "Give me the evidence and the girl, and I'll let you ride away. You can disappear again, live out your days in peace. Fight me, and I'll kill you both right here." Cole looked at the evidence box in his hands, then at Emma. She met his eyes and gave a tiny shake of her head. "Don't give up. Don't surrender." "No deal," Cole said. Miller's expression hardened. "Then you die." He raised his hand to signal his men. But before he could give the order, Emma did something desperate and brilliant. She shouted at the top of her lungs, "I've memorized everything, every name, every date, every dollar amount. You can kill us. But I already sent a telegram to Marshal Carter in Cheyenne. He knows everything." It was a bluff, a complete lie, but Miller didn't know that. He hesitated, his hand still raised, uncertainty flickering across his face. Cole understood immediately what Emma was doing. He played along. "She sent it 2 days ago. Carter's probably already on his way here with federal deputies." Miller's eyes narrowed. "You're lying." "Are we?" Emma said, her voice stronger now. "You willing to bet your life on that? Because if we dumb and that telegram's real, you'll hang within a month." Miller lowered his hand slowly. Cole could see the calculation happening behind those cold blue eyes. The old lawman was weighing odds, considering possibilities. "Even if there's no telegram," Cole said quietly, "killing us confirms the evidence is real. Let us go. You've got a chance to run. Kill us, and every lawman in Wyoming will be hunting you." When the standoff stretched out, seconds ticking past like hours. Emma's heart hammered so hard she thought it might burst through her ribs. Cole's hand stayed near his gun, ready to draw if Miller made the wrong choice. Then Thomas Hayes did something unexpected. He pulled away from the rider, holding him, and stumbled toward Miller, reaching for the rifle on the man's saddle. "I can't do this anymore," Thomas shouted. "I can't let you hurt her." He got his hands on the rifle and swung it toward Miller. The shot that followed was deafening. Thomas Hayes jerked backward, a red stain spreading across his chest. He fell to his knees, then onto his face in the dirt. Miller holstered his smoking pistol calmly. "Fool," he muttered. Emma screamed and started to run toward her uncle, but Cole grabbed her arm. "Don't, it's what he wants." Miller's men were drawing weapons now, spreading out. The situation was deteriorating fast. Cole knew they had maybe 10 seconds before this turned into a bloodbath. Then salvation came from an unexpected direction. From the south, the sound of multiple horses approaching fast. Cole turned and saw them, a group of 7 riders wearing federal badges, led by a man Cole recognized even after 8 years. Marshal David Carter, 60 years old with a steel gray mustache and eyes like chips of flint, reined in his horse and took in the scene with a lawman's practiced assessment. Dead man on the ground, two groups facing off, weapons drawn, tension thick enough to cut. "What in the hell is going on here?" Carter demanded. Miller recovered quickly, putting on a smile. "Marshal Carter, good timing. I was just about to arrest this man." He pointed at Cole. "Cole Brennan, wanted for the murder of Thomas Brennan 8 years ago." Carter looked at Cole, recognition dawning. "Well, I'll be damned. Brennan, thought you were dead." "Not yet," Cole said. He held up the evidence box. "Though Miller's been trying to arrange that." "That box contains stolen property," Miller said smoothly. "Evidence in an ongoing investigation that Brennan here has been hiding." "That's a lie," Emma said, stepping forward. "That box contains proof that Miller murdered Cole's son and has been running a human trafficking operation for the last 8 years. Carter's eyebrows rose. "That's a serious accusation, young lady." "And I can prove every word," Emma said. She pulled the ledger from the boss and held it up. "This is Thomas Brennan's handwriting. 6 months of evidence documenting Miller's corruption. Dates, amounts, names of everyone he bribed or blackmailed." Miller's face had gone pale. "She's lying. That's a forgery." "Then you won't mind if Marshal Carter examines it," Cole said. Carter dismounted and walked forward, taking the ledger from Emma. He flipped through it, his expression growing darker with each page. When he reached the letter at the end, he read it slowly, then looked up at Miller. "This is Thomas Brennan's signature," Carter said. "I know, because the boy wrote to me twice asking for advice on how to handle a corrupt superior." He closed the ledger with a snap. "You want to explain this, Miller?" Miller's hand twitched toward his gun. Cole saw it and drew faster, the cold appearing in his hand like magic. Miller froze. "Don't," Cole said softly. "I've waited 8 years for this. Give me a reason." Carter's deputies had their weapons out now, too, all pointed at Miller and his men. The odds had shifted dramatically. "Garrett Miller," Carter said formally, "you're under arrest for murder, corruption, conspiracy, and human trafficking. Drop your weapons. Now." For a moment, Miller looked like he might fight. Then his shoulders slumped and he tossed his pistol to the ground. His men followed suit, recognizing a losing situation when they saw one. As the deputies moved in to secure the prisoners, Emma ran to where her uncle lay. She knelt beside him, cradling his head. Thomas Hayes's eyes were glazed with pain, but he was still breathing. "Emma," he whispered, "I'm sorry. So sorry." "Shh," Emma said, tears streaming down her face. "Save your strength." "No strength left." Thomas coughed, blood flecking his lips. "I was weak, selfish, but at the end, I tried to do right." "You did," Emma said, squeezing his hand. "You saved us." Thomas Hayes smiled faintly. Then his eyes fixed on something beyond Emma's shoulder, and the light went out of them. He was gone. Emma bowed her head over her uncle's body and wept. Not for the man he'd been, but for the man he might have become if he'd been stronger, braver, better. Cole came and stood beside her, placing a gentle hand on her shoulder. "He made a choice at the end," Cole said quietly. "Died trying to protect you. That counts for something." Emma nodded, unable to speak through her grief. They stood together over the body while Carter's men finished securing Miller and his accomplices. Carter approached Hitchcock, studying the older man carefully. "You've got a lot of explaining to do, Brennan." "I know," Cole said, "and I'm ready to do it. But first, you need to know what Miller's been doing. Emma can tell you better than I can." Over the next hour, while Carter's men buried Thomas Hayes in a shallow grave beside Sarah's marker, Emma told the marshal everything. The mining camps, the trafficking operation, the women she'd seen, hollow-eyed and hopeless, her own 3 escapes and recaptures, Miller's casual cruelty and absolute confidence that he'd never face justice. Carter listened without interrupting, his face growing grimmer with each detail. When Emma finished, he turned to Miller, who sat handcuffed on the ground. "You got anything to say?" Carter asked. Miller looked up, and for the first time, Cole saw real fear in those cold blue eyes. "I want a lawyer." "You'll get one," Carter said, "right before they hang you." He turned back to Cole. "As for you, there's still the matter of that old warrant. You're technically still wanted for Thomas's murder." I didn't kill my son, Cole said steadily. Miller did. The evidence proves it. The evidence suggests it, Carter corrected. But a judge will have to decide. You'll have to come with us to Cheyenne, face trial. Cole nodded. He'd expected this. Justice required process even when the truth was clear. Emma grabbed Cole's arm. No, you can't take him. He's innocent. And a trial will prove that, Carter said gently. But it has to be done proper. You understand that, don't you, Brennan? I do, Cole said. He looked at Emma. It's all right. I'm not running anymore. I'm coming with you, Emma said fiercely. No need, Carter said. We'll take care of him. I'm coming, Emma repeated, her voice brooking no argument. Cole's the only family I have left. I'm not leaving him. Carter looked between them, seeing something there that made him nod slowly. All right then, you can both ride with us to Cheyenne. They made camp that night near the canyon, building fires and posting guards. Miller and his men were kept separate, under heavy watch. Cole and Emma sat together by their own fire, neither speaking, both lost in thought. You should have let me stay behind, Cole said finally. This is going to be a long process. Trials take time. I don't care, Emma said. I'm not leaving you to face this alone. Cole looked at her in the firelight, this young woman who'd somehow become the most important person in his world. You know I might not win. The warrant's been active for 8 years. The evidence is good, but Miller had influence. He might have allies on the bench. Then we'll fight harder, Emma said simply. Together. Cole reached out and took her hand. Emma Hayes, you're the bravest person I've ever known. I learned from the best, Emma said, squeezing his fingers. They sat together watching the flames, two survivors bound by trauma and healing, preparing for the fight ahead. The trial took place 3 weeks later in Cheyenne. The courtroom was packed with spectators, journalists, and curious onlookers. Cole sat at the defendant's table wearing his old marshal's badge, which Carter had allowed him to keep. Emma sat directly behind him, her hand occasionally reaching forward to touch his shoulder in support. Miller sat at the prosecution table, looking smaller somehow, diminished by circumstances. His lawyer was competent, but not exceptional, hired with what remained of Miller's ill-gotten money. The prosecution made its case first. The old warrant, the witness statements from 8 years ago claiming Cole had been seen arguing with Thomas shortly before the shooting, the badge found near Thomas's body covered in blood. It looked bad. Cole could see the jury's faces hardening as the prosecutor painted him as a corrupt lawman who'd killed his own son to prevent exposure. Then the defense began. Marshal Carter testified about receiving letters from Thomas Brennan asking advice on how to handle a corrupt superior. The dates on those letters matched entries in the ledger. A ballistics expert testified that the bullet that killed Thomas Brennan came from a Remington revolver, the type Miller had carried in 1877. Cole's service weapon had been a Colt, different caliber, different rifling pattern. Emma testified about the trafficking operation, corroborated by statements from 3 other women Carter's men had rescued from the mining camps. She described Miller's methods, his cruelty, his absolute confidence that he was untouchable. And finally, they introduced the ledger in Thomas's letter. The courtroom fell silent as the judge read that letter aloud. Cole closed his eyes, hearing his son's voice in those words, feeling the love and courage that had driven Thomas to document Miller's crimes, even knowing it might cost him his life. When the judge finished reading, there wasn't a dry eye in the courtroom. The jury deliberated for 4 hours. When they returned, the foreman stood and faced the judge. In the matter of the Wyoming Territory versus Cole Brennan, on the charge of murder, how do you find? Not guilty, Your Honor. Cole's knees went weak with relief. Emma let out a sob of joy behind him. The courtroom erupted in applause and conversation. The judge banged his gavel. Order! We're not done yet. He turned to where Miller sat. Bring the other defendant forward. Miller was led to stand before the bench, his wrists still shackled. The judge looked at him with undisguised contempt. Garrett Miller, you've been found guilty on 14 counts of corruption, conspiracy, murder, and human trafficking. I've seen a lot of evil in my years on the bench, but you represent something particularly vile. A man entrusted with upholding the law who instead perverted it for personal gain. Miller said nothing, his face like stone. I hereby sentence you to death by hanging, the judge continued. sentenced to be carried out 30 days from today. May God have mercy on your soul, because I have none." The gavel came down with finality. Guards led Miller away, and this time Cole saw the fear naked on the man's face. Real consequences were coming, and there was no talking his way out. Cole stood on shaking legs and turned to find Emma. She threw her arms around him, and he held her tight, feeling years of weight lifting from his shoulders. Not gone, maybe never entirely gone, but lighter. Manageable. "It's over," Emma whispered. "It's finally over." "Not quite," Cole said. He pulled back and looked at her seriously. "There's one more thing I need to do." 2 days later, they stood in front of a different judge in a different courtroom. This one was smaller, quieter, with only Marshall Carter present as a witness. "Mr. Brennan," the judge said, "you're petitioning to adopt Emma Hayes as your legal daughter. Is that correct?" "Yes, Your Honor," Cole said. "Miss Hayes, do you consent to this adoption?" Emma nodded, tears already streaming down her face. "Yes, Your Honor. More than anything." The judge smiled, the first genuine warmth Cole had seen from anyone in authority in 8 years. "Then by the power vested in me by Wyoming Territory, I declare this adoption legal and binding. Emma Hayes, you are now Emma Brennan." He signed the papers with a flourish and handed them to Cole. "Congratulations, both of you." Outside the courthouse, Emma threw her arms around Cole again. "Thank you," she said, "for everything, for saving me, for protecting me, for giving me a family." Cole held her close, feeling something break open in his chest. Not pain this time, but something that felt almost like joy. "You gave me something too," he said quietly. "A reason to stop running. A reason to stand and fight. A reason to believe I could still do some good in this world." They stood together on the courthouse steps, father and daughter not by blood but by choice, and watched the sun set over Cheyenne. Marshall Carter joined them, tipping his hat. "What will you do now?" he asked. Cole looked at Emma, then back at Carter. "Go home, fix up the cabin, maybe get some cattle, live quiet." "You thinking about taking up the badge again?" Carter asked. "Wyoming could use good lawmen." Cole smiled and unpinned the old marshal's badge from his shirt. He held it for a moment, feeling the weight of it, the history. Then he handed it to Carter. "I was that man once," Cole said. "Did the best I could, but that life cost me everything I loved. I'm someone different now. Someone who's learned that protecting one person completely is worth more than trying to save everyone." Carter accepted the badge with a nod of understanding. "Can't argue with that." They shook hands, and Carter rode away. Cole and Emma walked to where the Tennessee Walker waited, patient as always. Cole helped Emma into the saddle, then swung up behind her. "Ready to go home?" he asked. "More than ready," Emma said. They rode out of Cheyenne as the stars began to appear, heading back toward the ranch that had become their sanctuary. The journey took 4 days, and they rode easy, stopping early each evening to make camp, talking or sitting in comfortable silence. On the last night, camped under a sky full of stars, Emma asked the question she'd been holding. "What happened to Miller, in the end?" Cole poked at the fire with a stick. "Hanged, just like the judge ordered. Carter sent word 2 weeks ago. Said Miller went quiet, didn't fight it. Maybe he finally understood what he'd done." "I'm glad," Emma said softly. "Not glad he's dead exactly, but glad there was justice." "So am I," Cole agreed. They reached the ranch the next afternoon. The cabin had been repaired in their absence, courtesy of Carter's men who'd stayed behind to guard the property. New door, patched roof, windows replaced. It looked better than it had in years. Cole and Emma stood in the yard, looking at their home. "It needs work," Emma said. "New fence posts, the corral could use expansion. And we should plant a garden in the spring." "We?" Cole asked, smiling. "We," Emma confirmed. "This is my home now, too. Our home." Cole pulled her into a one-armed hug. "Our home," he agreed. They went inside together. Emma started a fire while Cole unpacked their few belongings. When the cabin was warm and the coffee was brewing, they sat at the table together. "I've been thinking," Emma said, "about names. What about them? When I have children someday, I want to name my first son Thomas, after your son, to honor him." Cole felt his eyes burn with tears. He reached across the table and took Emma's hand. "He would have liked you." Thomas would have liked you very much." "I wish I could have known him," Emma said. "In a way you do," Cole said. "His courage, his belief in doing what's right no matter the cost, that's part of why we're sitting here today. He's part of this family, even if he's gone." They sat together as darkness fell, father and two daughter, survivor and protector, two people who'd found each other in the worst circumstances and forged something beautiful from the wreckage. Over the following months, they settled into a rhythm. Cole taught Emma everything he knew about ranching, tracking, surviving in the wild. Emma brought life and warmth to the cabin that had been missing for 8 years. They worked hard, laughed often, and slowly healed the wounds that had brought them together. On the anniversary of the day they met, Cole took Emma back to the canyon. They stood at Sarah's grave together, and Cole introduced his first daughter to his second. "Sarah, this is Emma. She's ours now. I think you would have loved her. She's strong like you were, brave like you were, and she's given this old man a reason to keep living." He paused, looking at the grave marker, then at Emma. "You taught me something I should have known all along. Family isn't just blood, it's who you'd die to protect, who you'd live to serve. That's what Thomas believed. That's what you deserved. And that's what Emma's shown me again." Emma placed flowers on the grave, then stepped back and took Cole's hand. "Thank you," Cole whispered to the wind, to Sarah's memory, to whatever force had brought Emma into his life at exactly the right moment. "Thank you for this second chance." They rode back to the ranch together as the sun set, two lives that had intersected on a dusty Wyoming road and become permanently intertwined. Behind them, the past with all its pain and regret. Ahead of them, a future neither had dared to imagine. And in the space between past and future, in the eternal present of this moment, Cole Brennan and Emma Brennan were simply home. Together. A family. The last guardian had found his purpose. And the girl who had once offered everything for a ride had received something far more valuable in return. She'd received a father, a home, and the understanding that she was worth protecting, worth saving, worth loving. Not because of what she could offer, but simply because she existed. And that made all the difference.